activity.
Let's talk a little bit more about all of this with our industry correspondent, John Moylan. And it's a subject that really divides people, isn't it, John?
It absolutely is, because this is not how we've traditionally got our energy offshore. This is very much onshore. This is in people's backyards. I mean, I've been up at one of the sites in Lancashire where this is happening, and it is literally a mile away from where people live in the open countryside. So this is about extracting gas from rock that's a mile down in the ground, using methods which involve a lot of water, a lot of chemicals. We know that in the past they set off seismic activity and small earth tremors, and so there has been a lot of concern about this. So the work in Lancashire was shut down last year when a series of earth tremors happened. Some reports were carried out into it by scientists. The government has looked at all of those, consulted on it, but it has concluded that it can give the go-ahead in principle for exploratory fracking in the UK to resume. Ed Davey, the Secretary of State, said that shale gas was a promising new energy source. It could help our energy security. We'll have a homegrown source of energy, that it would reduce our reliance upon imported gas. But he said there would also be some new controls. Now, earlier he was speaking in the Commons and he explained why he had given the go-ahead for shale gas fracking.
Shale gas may prove to be a useful addition to the UK's diverse portfolio of energy sources and will be particularly valuable in replacing declining North Sea supplies, with benefits to energy security as well as to the economy and employment. But its exploitation will only be acceptable if it is safe and the environment is properly protected. Hydraulic fracturing operations for shale gas were suspended last year, pending consideration of seismic events in Lancashire. Based on the latest evidence and expert advice, and having considered responses to a public consultation on that advice, I have concluded that, in principle, fracking for shale gas can be allowed to resume, subject to new controls to mitigate the risk of seismicity.
Ed Davey there. So, yes, people will want to hear about those controls. What is the company saying? What happens now? How quickly does this get underway again? Well,
the company involved is called Quadrilla Resources. I mean, it's basically had a rap on the knuckles over all of this, because it's turned out that on the ground, the people on the ground who were aware of these earth tremors happening were not feeding through that information to the board of the company. So there have been changes put in place for how that reporting structure is going to work. There have been some management changes. That is all going to be monitored. And so there is an approval in principle for this work to go ahead. But actually, they have to see how that's going to work within the company before there's a final go-ahead. The company itself is today saying that this marks a turning point for UK energy. And just to put this into some kind of scale, the company claims that on the basis of its own licensed areas up in Lancashire, that it has access to so much potential gas down there that they could actually, from those licensed areas, they could supply something like 25% of the demand for gas in this country going forward for the next 2, 3, 4 decades. It's extraordinary stuff.
And so people hearing that will think, great, if there's more of it, if it's a secure supply, this must mean cheaper gas for me. What does it actually mean for the ordinary customer?
Well, this is fascinating territory because, of course, in the United States, shale gas has been exploited over the past decade really fast, and it has caused domestic gas prices to really collapse. It's been a revolution. In fact, the Prime Minister this week talked about the fact that there is this revolution going on in gas around the world, and he wants Britain to be part of it. The problem is, Britain is not landlocked like the United States. It's part of a European hub for gas. Gas flows in, but it flows out. Lots of experts have looked at this, and the thought is that the best that we can hope for is that it will keep a lid on our prices. There was one report out from some recognised and respected consultants who said that maybe going forward it could knock 2 to 4% off the price of gas. So this isn't going to revolutionise our bills, but going forward it could be another indigenous source of energy that does help to keep our gas prices down and doesn't leave us reliant upon gas from places like Qatar or Russia, for example.
Yes. Well, we'll talk more about all of that in the next hour or two. Thanks for now, John Moylan. Thank you.
Well, let's get more reaction. Let's speak to Mark Wallace, who's from the Institute of Directors. He's there in our central London studios. Good morning. What reaction?
Good morning. Well, I think it's good news. The government have made the right decision that exploration of UK shale gas resources and the potential of them should go ahead, and that's something that I think should be welcomed by people who are interested in, actually reducing pollution coming out of the UK, reducing reliance on expensive foreign imports, but also in terms of creating jobs. I think there's a lot of potential here.
I'll come back to jobs, but good news despite the risks that we were discussing there, seismic activity, water pollution.
Well, it's absolutely important when you're doing any kind of industrial activity, particularly extractive industries like fracking, or for that matter mining or drilling for oil and so on, that you properly study potential risks and you have the proper regulatory regime in place. That's something we've called for quite some time. The US, as we've just heard, has gone ahead with a big shale expansion in the last 10 years. We need to learn the lessons from what they've done right, and also the lessons from some places where perhaps they've got things wrong. But there's no reason in principle, certainly judging by the wider studies on the topic, that fracking should be any more dangerous and risky than any other kind of hydrocarbon extraction. And we need to view it as, it's quite a well-established technology that's been invented it was invented about 40 years ago.
You used the American comparison, but I was listening on the radio this morning and people making the point that actually in America this is often done in deserted areas. Here it is densely populated and would be drilling under those particular areas.
Well, in some places it's done in relatively abandoned areas in the States, but there are also parts of Texas where it takes place in, frankly, almost urban or suburban settings. So this is something that obviously you need to take into account, the fact that there are neighbours, there are local communities, and you need to weigh up the advantages and disadvantages for them. So it is really important that we get this right in the UK, and I think there are also things we can learn, say, from France's example, where when they give permission for new power stations of any sort to be built, they also tend to look at whether people in the local area from a few miles around might get cheaper or even free energy as a result of it. So there are a lot of things we can do to try and make sure that this takes place within the community. Of course, it'll be from that community that you actually join the workforce.
You mentioned jobs a while ago. Do you have any sort of projection as to quite how many jobs this might generate?
Well, the IOD released a report back in September where we took quite a pessimistic estimate. We essentially said that if the UK is half as successful as the US has been, on a pretty midfield kind of estimate of how much shale gas there might be onshore in the UK, then you are talking about an industry that could generate around 35,000 jobs, and those are skilled engineering jobs. A lot of them, it seems, from what we know so far and from exploration, in parts of the country like Lancashire that would, could certainly benefit from them.
OK, Mark Wallace, thanks for your time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Just to bring you news coming through from the Eurozone, we are hearing that